Hey everybody, welcome back to Brain Power. This is episode 12. We are on the eve, or almost the eve, of the Decentralized AI Agents Demo Week down in Austin. I'm going to be down there. I hope to see you down there. But on today's episode of Brain Power, I am joined by Syed and Jim of SHIZA.AI, who are contributors to the large initiative of the Morpheus Agent Forge that the community is building. I can't wait for you to hear from them, all the things that they're working on to help build out the Agent Forge initiative. Let's dive right into it. Without further ado, here is Syed and Jim from SHIZA.
I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it, through it, through it, through it.
You're listening to Brain Power.
Joining me today, this is Brain Power episode 12. I have with me Syed and Jim of SHIZA, and we're going to dive into what they're building with SHIZA, their view of what an agentic AI future looks like, as well as how it integrates into the Morpheus protocol. And yeah, there's a lot to cover. So as always, thanks guys, first of all, for being here. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be on with you, Bo. We're
An
big
honor.
fans of Morpheus.
Oh, let's go. Okay, I'll take an honor. That's the first I've gotten an honor. That's very nice of you.
You're
only 12 episodes in.
We're
That's
pretty
right.
good at firsts.
Fair. No, I love it. Well, that's certainly true. We met, I guess, for some context for people, for the first time down in Denver at the Dawn of the Agents event, and you were showcasing some of the stuff you had already built, and I was very impressed because it was already a live demo, and we'll get into kind of what that was and what it looks like. But can you guys just give a little bit of background to the community and Brain Power listeners as to like who I always say, who the heck are you? Like, who are you? What are you working on? How'd you get here?
Awesome. Yeah, happy to kick things off. And I guess before we get started, one little caveat there, to kick things off. You had mentioned our vision of agentic AI. We go slightly a step further, and what we're building out is really more towards post-agentic AI. So we'll get into the nits and grits of all of that and what that means, and then our vision and our alignment with Morpheus. But to answer your question directly, Bo, my background, I come from the capital market, serial entrepreneur. I started off in the .com days early. So my first company that I launched, I was a senior in high school when I was doing that. That was at the dawn of the era of this thing called the internet, and jumped very heavily into the data side of things. So from all the way from data warehousing to ETL, business intelligence, and then eventually to business into geospatial analytics, natural language processing, and then the sort of AI came very, very naturally for us and our cohort. And then from a industry perspective, my background is in the capital market. So I fell in love, started off with GE Corporate, and through there started getting exposure to the to GE Capital, and really fell in love with the capital markets through then. So investment banking, trading, asset management, M&A, jumped into that. And then from there, I believe it or not, I started getting exposure into this thing called Bitcoin, which I came into, which actually I came into, given my capital markets background. It only makes sense for what I'm about to say. A cynic of Bitcoin, and there was a lot of noise, a lot of sort of diametrically opposing viewpoints across the board. So I said, you know what, the best way to understand it for myself is let me go directly to the source. So directly to the source, I certainly went, which was the white paper by Satoshi. Went into it and was completely blown away by the implications of this technology that was powering it, where if you can algorithmically solve for the problem of trust and incentivization, we're going to end up having a new economic paradigm on our hands. And it's going to completely shift the way that we think about what the future of finance and the future of economics is going to look like for us. So I was actually came into this into Web3 through this project called BankX, which were the guys behind they literally wrote the white paper on RWA, this proof of asset protocol that we were building out. But then the founder and I, we didn't see eye to eye. He wanted to focus more on the retail side of it. I wanted to focus more on the institutional side of it. And from there, I left to go launch a company focusing on the ability for institutions to do deal making with one another without exposing their most valuable asset, which is their investor network, on top of this this protocol called zero knowledge proof. And during that time, when I had launched this company called Liquidity Digital, that is where I met my now co-founder and partner in crime, Jim. So we had met through a common investor. Jim was running their BD for them at that point in time. So Jim was also, we kept in touch. And then fast forward to when this sort of watershed moment with OpenAI started to happen. One of the things that we were looking to build out in my previous company was this deal recommendation engine. But the cost of capital that was required was going to be so significant that we had pushed it out onto our roadmap a bit later on. And then the market sort of turned, and we actually ended up getting ghosted by one of our investors that was supposed to come into us. So we had to pivot. And one of the things that I started looking at was that deal recommendation engine that we were looking to build out. I said, well, let me start playing with this OpenAI, which we were early adopters into their as a part of the original API when they had released it. So we were able to build out this due diligence analyst, and I was going to come to market with it, which was essentially the first agentic solution that we had built out, and this was about I would say 12 to 18 months ago, right, was when we built it, and we're going to come to market with it. But then I realized very, very quickly, and this is where the point around the agentic AI versus post-agentic comes into play. What I realized at that point in time was that, hold on, if a dummy like me could come up with something like this so quickly and without much resources that are required to be able to build this out, the reality is that there is going to end up being a mass proliferation of these agentic solutions that are going to be coming into the market. And if I know that to be the case, then rather than us position ourselves in this place, which is going to end up getting commoditized, let's start to look at what the second and third order effects of this is going to be, which forced us to think about not an agentic solution, but what does a post-agentic world look like? And in that post-agentic world, where what we're seeing is that these agents, which are essentially just algorithmically driven from based and built off of these large language models, that's going to lead to a lot of automation. That automation of tasks will lead to the automation of processes, and ultimately the automation of those processes is going to lead to the automation of jobs. So for us, that was an inevitability that we saw. And then there was a lot of talk around, things like silly solutions like UBI and whatnot, which, I was adamantly against, because I don't see that as being a viable long-term solution. It's even short-term. It's actually, it's going to end up doing a lot more harm than good. So we started thinking about what will the solution for something like this actually be. And for us, this is where we started thinking about, if these jobs can and will be automated, they're going to be replaced by these AI agents. Well, in that instance, those AI agents that end up replacing your labor, because historically we've been a very labor-driven economy, right? Whether it's physical labor, manual labor, intellectual labor, creative labor, it's labor nevertheless that we monetize on. The labor is the output. The input is what we call the intellect, right? The experience that goes into it. Today, the two are one and the same. What we said was that if you have the ability to break that out, which is what agents are going to end up doing, those agents that are going to replace your labor, you better make sure you own those agents, as opposed to these centralized entities and that are ultimately going to own them, which should spell music to the ears of all of the Morpheus audience that's listening to this, because that is part and parcel of the whole Morpheus ecosystem as well, right? Decentralization of AI. So for us, it was let's find out the components, how we can decentralize AI, and do so in a way where it's not the large language models that retain ownership of your experience, but you have your own individualized language model, or your ILM, or like we like to call it, an ILM. That ILM is nominally yours. You're the only ones that have access to it. And and then ultimately what we want to do is we want to give that ability to you. So for the vision of SHIZA, which stands for Shared Human Intellect Zonal Agents, is we envision a world in which agents are a reality, and and the output of those agents and what they end up doing becomes a monetizable mechanism for you to derive your value from your experience, which is what they're learning from. And the ability is given to you where you will own your AI, as opposed to the alternative in which the AI ends up owning you.
You just covered a ton of stuff. I was taking mental notes. I want to talk about all of it. Before we do that, though, Jim, I just want to hear a really quick intro from your side as well, just on kind of your background, how you got involved in all of this. And then we have a whole slew of things to cover. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to get through it quickly. The least favorite thing I do every day is credentialize myself on phone calls. But for that reason, I think I have it down to a science. And yeah, I was very fortunate to have been born and raised in New York City in the 90s, which I think is, peak everything. Was really lucky to get scholarships to really good schools. And like Syed, I consider myself kind of like a child of the internet, where it felt like at each point in my life where those technologies were accessible, they were accessible by my age group. So like, when the first Macintosh came out, remember, not the first Macintosh, but like the ones with the colored,
Yep.
back panels on the single monitors, like that was my first great experience, was like getting to play, those games on a Mac. And that kind of began my obsession with technology, and started, building and selling computers as my first business when I was 13 and 14 years old. At which point I kind of made a critical decision, which is kind of funny looking back on it, because I got full scholarships to a school that was very much academically oriented, and one that was mostly for ice hockey. Like, I grew up playing ice hockey, and so I looked at my parents and saw that my 5'1" Irish mother was probably not going to do very well for my long-term tenure on a road to the NHL, and decided that I better start reading books instead. Because the other thing that I noticed was that the only people that could afford the sports cars that I liked were either professional athletes or traders on Wall Street. And so that kind of began my very fervent passion to understand finance and economics and investing. And so I've kind of always looked at the world since through that lens of measuring risk and looking at the world through behavioral economics. And that's kind of, I would say, if there was one thing that I would like to think of myself as an expert on, it would be that. But otherwise, I'm very much a generalist, and started out my career in sales and trading on Wall Street, albeit working out of Los Angeles at a boutique investment bank. So started the grind early, waking up at 3:30 in the morning and getting to the trading desk at 4 a.m. in Beverly Hills to trade from afar and learn that skill, which was great. But one of the things that I learned through both internships in a variety of places on Wall Street and there was that at any point when the market sees an opportunity to replace people or intermediaries or brokers with technology, it very rapidly takes that opportunity. So those step function increases in market efficiency, I kind of had a front row seat to my entire career. And that led me ultimately to, blockchain and now, I would say the intersection of blockchain and AI. But that was kind of the writing on the wall for me. It was like, as a bond sales trader, a junior guy on a desk, I watched the entire voice bond brokerage market be replaced by a single company that was the number one performing company in the S&P 500 for like 15 years thereafter. So it was a very strong and interesting lesson that where there's the opportunity for disintermediation, it very likely will happen when the technology allows for it. And after a startup in 2012-13 that got bought, unluckily for me, before my equity vested, with my buddy Sergio, who I still am very close with. He's also in the crypto Web3 space. After that, I opened up a large-scale fitness facility in New York City from the standpoint of trying to institute some idea of preventative medicine through exercise and health and nutrition counseling, my equity vested in that is when I made the leap to the crypto world, where I've been doing BD and strategy consulting for the past 7 years or so. And the thing that really, like Syed tells his origin story of reading the Bitcoin white paper, which I think a lot of people who got into crypto, that was one of the first steps. And for me, the thing that precluded that was reading a book called Republic Lost, written by a Harvard professor named Lawrence Lessig, who outlined in detail the lobbying process in the United States and how laws are formulated. And I got so sick to my stomach reading that book that Bitcoin in many ways started to symbolize this idea of a supranational currency, or something where the end user is empowered and not and much less a slave to the whims of political pendulums. And so that's what got me interested in Bitcoin and crypto in the first place. I got a little bit more involved in the policy side with an advocacy group called the Global Blockchain Business Council, where I was afforded very lucky opportunities to meet with interesting people, speak to the blockchain caucus of Congress when Facebook's Libra coin came out, testified on the New York Privacy Act as a blockchain technology expert. As you can see, I kind of got the relics to
Love
show
that so much.
that was true. Yeah, it's very fitting for this apropos for Morpheus and what we're doing here. Yeah, met Syed through, like he said, a common friend in the crypto space. We were both, riding the waves in the Wild West as crypto was developing in 2018, 2019. And we remained friends that entire time. And when Syed called me in late 2023, early 2024, he explained to me his vision for SHIZA, and I was like, yep, I see it happening very quickly. And the cool part about it, I think, was that, Syed says this very well when he mentions that blockchain is kind of like a hammer looking for a nail. And one of those nails for, a mainstream adoption use case, we think very much so is decentralized AI. And to me, kind of what we're at a nexus now where you kind of have the last opportunity to take custody and ownership of your data, especially those that can relate to money or derive money from it. And decentralizing AI is that thing for me. And our biggest fight, a book that our friend Michael Casey co-wrote, is, I think, a very good description of what's happening and what's to come. And Morpheus is an excellent example of an attempt to solve that problem at scale in the right way. So that's ultimately what led me here. So hopefully that's a good enough description.
No, it's fantastic. I love it. It's funny. I'm realizing as you guys are talking, so we've obviously worked together a little bit over the past let's just call it a couple months, as you're, building things and looking to integrate with Morpheus as a project. I'm realizing we have more in common than I even thought that we did. So first of all, also grew up playing ice hockey. That's besides the point. But and then I played lacrosse in college until a injury left me to doing the book route as well. Which is maybe the best thing.
These are not my real teeth, Bo.
Oh, look, mine are still broken too. Which are maybe the best thing that ever happened to me, though, because it was funny as you were talking and you were like, I realized the only two people that drove the cars I wanted to drive were professional athletes and Wall Street guys. It was like, you could not have put the words maybe in my mouth better when I was, 19 years old, going through that similar type of development. And also, it's good too because pro lacrosse, even if you make it there, is not. Those guys still have jobs.
You're lucky to be making $100 grand.
Yeah. I'm friends with some of those guys.
I was a midi as well. So I
nice. Awesome. But no, on the personal side, but then on the professional side as well too, you guys having both been capital markets guys, and I didn't realize, Jim, that you'd worked specifically in bonds. My background was in collateralized loan obligations and then middle market direct lending, so very familiar with that world as well. Also got radicalized into Web3 and crypto when I really realized and learned what money is. I think people just at large have they have a misunderstanding or maybe just not an intellectual curiosity about what money actually is. And what I've come to realize is there's basically three real commodities that impact humanity, but beyond the hierarchy of needs. If we ignore the hierarchy of needs in the sense of, food, shelter, water, and we look at socially beyond that, there's basically violence, money, and intelligence. And like those are the three things that kind of shape the way everything else functions in society. Well, unfortunately, I am and individuals are not really in a position to try to monopolize violence. But what we can do is create systems that bifurcate power away from centralized entities and elites and corporations and nation states in the form of money and intelligence. Bitcoin obviously being the example of solving that for money with things like Ethereum, now Solana, other smart contract platforms, taking that a step further and saying, okay, well now we don't just have money, we now have money applications that can do things with that money. And now we're taking it even further than that and saying, okay, we need to now hit that intelligence portion of things and create that as like a freedom. I like to refer to it as freedom tech. What I used to call Web3 or crypto, I now just call it like freedom tech because it touches so many different things beyond just the money. But it was interesting hearing that you guys had kind of been, I say radicalized a little tongue in cheek, but brought into the space, with those same ideologies and with those same understandings. One thing I want to touch on is you were talking, Syed, about the post-agentic world. So can we just define that a little bit further and how SHIZA fits into that world? I know you did like a high level. Can we just define what is post-agentic, or what does an agentic world look like, first of all? Can you just start there? And I know, again, it's a little bit redundant, but I just want to hang on this point a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So let's start from the basics, right? What do we mean by, forget post-agentic, right? Let's just talk about agentic. And before we even get into agentic, let's talk about what is an agent, right? It's essentially what I call algorithmic agency. So the ability for any algorithm to be able to do certain tasks that it's been, that it's able to. Now, we had automation in the past. A lot of this has to do with automation. A lot of people can just snidely remark and say, look, well, I mean, what you're talking about is just automation, right? And automation has been around for quite a while, right? So what's so special about AI? Well, what's so special about AI is that those agents were given very, very those sort of automated workflows that we used to have in the past, right? You had to be very specific in terms of defining what could be done, right? Because it's things are built on top of foundations, right? So you have binary code, which is essentially just zeros and ones, and then those zeros and ones, that binary code is what we call bits. Those bits then start to come together. They end up forming bytes. Those bytes then start to form logic. That logic then ends up forming software. So what you used to have software, and then through that software, that was comprised of algorithms, you would have the ability for it to communicate first by itself, then across from one software to another. That's where a lot of these protocols were introduced as well, right? That would allow you to be able to do so, which then allowed the ability to now function inside of a particular vehicle. That vehicle would be called your personal computer. Then we gave it gave birth to the ability to connect one computer to another computer, right? So now all of a sudden there's a lot more agency that I had through this automated workflows. Problem was, though, and not necessarily a problem, but the reality was that I'm still limited in terms of I still needed to have these developers that would take business logic, and that business logic would then need to be translated into how systematically we're able to design what the output of what the business wants is going to be. This is where the developers would start to come in, and we would just code a lot of that. What's happening now, the magic of these transformer-based architectures, which ultimately led to these LLMs coming to place, and for those who don't know LLMs, large language models, was because they were trained on natural language. They were trained, and because they were trained on natural language, what ends up happening is, remember how earlier I had said the business requirements would get translated into developer language, and the developers would actually develop it and then provide it for you. That middle layer is now being replaced, and the replacement of that middle layer that's all happening through these through the natural language processing, right? And which is allowing for these algorithms to be able to communicate directly. Those algorithms are essentially what we call agents, right, in the world of AI. So these artificial intelligence agents, which they're still starting off where you give them a particular task, right, a small task to do, and then those agents are then able to communicate. One agent has a specific task that it gets done, and then then it'll communicate with another agent that can take that a step forward. The combination of one agent and another agent and another agent coming together to come up with a solution is a solution for a particular problem is what we call an agentic solution, right? So when we start to talk about agentic AI, that's what we really mean, is the ability to be able to say, hey, this is what I want, and this is what you're able to go out.
And so just to put a pause on this really quick, I don't want to cut you off. I just want to add a bit of context to this. This is where when you see people writing about MCP, like multiple context protocols in Morpheus, it's the Morpheus communication protocol. In I think it was Google or somebody else published agent to agent.
A2A.
Yeah, A2A. This is what they're talking about. They're talking about when you have these multiple agents that are nichely trained to be the best. If you, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that I kind of look at it is, if I, as an entity using a computer, like using computing to do something, am like the management company, all of these agents are individual employees who are extremely specialized in one thing, but they still need to coordinate with each other to get my overarching goal done in the best way possible. But then somebody has to manage that. Like somebody has to be the management of those agents, which is effectively what you guys are, or SHIZA rather, like what you're building. Is that fair to say? Good analogy?
Yeah. So look, I mean, when I gave earlier on, right, what we were talking about was I gave this sort of grandiose vision of where we're seeing the world going, right? So I want to bring it back to this point around, and then I'll tie it back to what you were alluding to. These agentic systems, right? These are going to allow for automation across the board, right? Like real automation, which then, as I was mentioning earlier, right, will lead to the automation of tasks, leading to the automation of processes, ultimately leading to the automation of jobs, so on and so forth. So everything ends up getting automated. That is what an agentic, so agentic systems will allow for you to be able to do that. When we talk about a post-agentic world, what we're talking about is what happens, right? This is an inevitability that will happen. So once that inevitability happens, what does the world look like after that? And the most important question to ask, and this is where our capital markets backgrounds comes in, is how the fuck do we make money? Right? It's from the dawn of humanity till now, right? We have been a very labor-driven economy, right?
Yeah, money is basically an expression of labor hours.
Correct. That's how we're deriving our value, right? So it's like my value is a lot more than just my labor. But the problem is the only mechanism for me to be able to display my value is in the form of the output, which is the labor, right? So when you have agents that are going to be able to replace that labor, let's not forget that those agents, right? So this is what for us, when we talk about post-agentic ecosystem in a post-agentic world, we're talking about once these agents are a reality, right? Which is happening as we speak. This is happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on this too, and I brought it up a bunch. The DAI has existed for basically 2 years. It's just moving really fast.
Like, I have been involved in this in the industry for well over 2.5 decades now, right? And I have I have never seen the kind of accelerated pace of innovation throughout my 2.5 decades than I have seen over the course of the last 24 months.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's before the development tools are actually writing code on a regular basis.
That's right.
We're not even there yet.
Right.
We've ever even witnessed. It's
right.
not really there yet. We're seeing foreshadowing, but it hasn't actually happened.
Exactly. This isn't the hammer hitting the nail. This is the hammer being attached to the wood, to the stick still, so that it can hit the nail. Yeah.
That's right. So speaking of like where these development tools are going to be coming in, that's probably a perfect transition and a segue into our partnership, our first step in this partnership with Morpheus, right? And what is it that we're doing? So, you know, what we've said is our slogan for SHIZA, like I said earlier, is own your AI before AI owns you, right? But then before you can own your AI, you need to be able to build your AI, which brings it back to the question that you were asking earlier about what is an agent, right? So the ability to be, now that we understand what an agent is, well, how about the ability to be able to build that agent that I'm ultimately going to be able to own, right? So I don't want someone else, if someone else builds it, I don't own it, right? But if
Right.
I can build it myself, I truly own it, right?
Yeah.
So giving people the ability to build their AI. So SHIZA is an overall ecosystem. Within that ecosystem, our flagship product that we came out with is what we call SHIZA Developer. SHIZA Developer allows you to build those AI agents. So when we talk about agentic AI, the ability to be able to create those agentic systems, to be able to create those AI agents is what SHIZA Developer allows you to do. Then what we did was we took SHIZA Developer and because we're obviously, for what it is that we're building out, one of the decisions that we made was that we're going to open source SHIZA, an aspect of SHIZA Developer, and we came across Morpheus and what Morpheus was doing. We started to look deeper and deeper into it, and we were actually introduced to Morpheus by one of our early angel investors, Michael Turpin, and he said, you guys should check them out. So that's initially where our where this conversation came from. So shout out to Michael Turpin, and then it was sort of formalized or started to get into the deeper formalization of it at the Decentralized AI Society when we were over there in
dinner in Davos. Yeah,
dinner in Davos that they held. So shout out to
I was going to say, I didn't know Michael Turpin was in your capital stack, but shout out Michael Turpin. I had met him for the first time down in Colorado, but I had read his book previously. Great guy. So yeah, shout out to him. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Great guy, great supporter, big believer in what it is that we're doing. And then of course, shout out to Michael Casey, another Michael Casey and James Haft for bringing us together with David Johnston and Scott, who we met at Davos. And that was essentially the beginning of our relationship. So what we did was we decided to take an open source version of SHIZA Developer and contributed that to the DE.AI Forge within Morpheus, and then we sort of unveiled that at the last event where you and I met, Bo, and that's where David gave a shout out to us during his keynote speech, which was great. And now we're looking forward to meeting the rest of the gang and sort of have our presence be known at the upcoming Austin developer meetup.
Absolutely. And I know that there's going to be some demonstration there as well. So I want to linger on this point because, yeah, it's ultimately where I wanted to get to with regard to SHIZA and Morpheus. So Morpheus, anyone who's listening to this probably already has a good understanding of what Morpheus is, but just in case someone is and doesn't, it is a protocol that is agnostic to use case. Morpheus exists for the purpose of allowing people to leverage code, capital, and compute in order to build decentralized AI. That is what it is at its core. And by that nature, it takes open source contributions for these things to get pushed forward. One of the, I don't know what to call it, I guess initiatives that the community has is to see what we refer to as an agent forge, which is basically this idea that you have a place where you can use different parts of the Morpheus protocol or different things that other people, communities, projects, whatever, have allocated to the Morpheus protocol to build your own agents, register it on the agent registry, and then tap into it through Morpheus Compute and have the, I guess, full life cycle of what it means to create an agent and have it published for real users, like your actual use case. And so what SHIZA did is they said, and again, rehashing a little bit of what you just said, but they took a version of their proprietary tech stack, open sourced it, opened it to the Morpheus community, and also is a builder subnet in the Morpheus community on the builder side. And so right now, and correct me if there's any additions to this, but staking to the builder subnet for SHIZA is ultimately supporting their efforts in open sourcing the development of this larger Agent Forge initiative, basically, that the community has, and we look at as a really, really important aspect of the protocol to have established. Is there anything else right now that's tied into the builder subnet, or is there kind of more announcements to come on that end?
There are going to be a few announcements that are to be had.
Okay.
One thing I did want to add to what you were saying though, Bo, and that it's a very important point that you did mention, is on two out of the three pieces, right? The code, capital, and compute. So think about like the contributions for SHIZA and the value of what the contributions that we are making, what that would be. One of the most important things that the Morpheus network is looking to attract is compute, right? And the compute is you need. So what you need is, it's like we're building a highway, but that highway, that's the infrastructure, right? That we're enabling for people, that people want to be able to go on. But on that highway, what you need is you're going to need to have the vehicles on that highway that are going to consume the resources on that highway. And then for the consumption of the resources on that highway in the form of compute, you're going to earn the capital, which is going to be in the form of the tolls, right? That where the value of the more tokens are going to go up into. So it's easy to see how the value of the capital will go up, but the compute, in order to gain that compute, what is it that you need? The best way to ensure that you get that compute is through those vehicles. What are those vehicles? Well, in the world of what we were talking about earlier, what is it that's going to that's going to be consuming the compute? What are going to be the consumers of that compute? It's going to be the agents themselves. So the first aspect of what it is that we're delivering with SHIZA developer, which is now in the Forge, and this is where when you stake to the SHIZA subnet, what you're going to end up getting is the ability to get access to be able to build out those agents, not for us, but for yourselves. You guys have in your hands a tool that's continuing to grow, that's continuing to allow you to build out your own agents, give you the autonomy and the ability to be able to build those out, which then leads us to the third aspect of it, which is the code. Imagine today you're a developer, you're contributing code, you're adding to the value within the Morpheus network through your coding capabilities. What better way to utilize those if you can create your own agents that are essentially doing the development for you, your own coding agents that are also going to ultimately go into it. So we see, and this is the reason why we immediately, literally when we spoke with Scott, because we're a startup, right? We were building out things, but when we spoke to Scott, when we saw the significance of the impact that we would be able to make within Morpheus, and when we saw the vision for what Morpheus was looking to do, the alignment was absolutely clear to us, and that's why we went back and we said, all right, guys, let's stop what we're doing right now, sort of shift gears, go into sort of focus mode, and prioritize this, build this out, and that's how we had delivered for the Forge for Morpheus. And we've been, we're continuing to build things out, and there's a lot more exciting things coming up.
Absolutely. And one thing to touch on too, I don't even think we've mentioned this yet, but the tool that you guys are talking about, the SHIZA developer open source spinoff, it's a no code tool. So
Yes.
So you do not have to be a software engineer to leverage this in order to make an agent. We haven't even touched on that yet, but I think it's really important, because when even like a couple months ago, when I heard people talking about building agents, as somebody who's like very, very, very actively involved in decentralized AI, but I'm not a software developer myself, for the longest time, it was looking kind of how DeFi looked for me, where it was, well, people are going to build these really cool DeFi tools, and I'm going to use my background in finance and capital markets and economics to use them, but I'm never going to be able to like make my own DeFi tool. But this is not that. This is actually the ability to make your own agent that does the thing or does the workflow that you want it to do using a no code tool that you don't need to be a software developer to do it, which is amazing. We didn't even touch on that part, but that's actually like one of the most exciting things about all of it, is that it's, I was going to say easy to use, relatively easy to use when you compare it to, actually like developing software.
Well, I didn't touch upon it for a reason, because I'm probably not the right guy to touch upon it. The right guy to touch upon it is and the best person to talk about that is probably Jim, who can talk about his own experience
Yeah,
working with
Jim,
SHIZA
can you dive into
Well,
that?
yeah, there was a few things that I wanted to touch upon there, and as you know, I would say I'm conceptually technical, but don't enjoy writing or reading code. You know, I took a programming class in college. I was chief revenue officer of an auditor in the Web3 world, and like for me, I always look at things as, well, all right, what weakness of mine can I fill in through education, right? And I have always known that the skill that I will never learn is writing code. And so for me, there's a few interesting things there that are again progressing so rapidly that it's going to be hard for many people to wrap their heads around it. But the most important thing, and why what I think this why this is really interesting, like I also tend to think of the world in the terms of lifestyle, as in, you know, working to live, not living to work. And to me, like, I don't want to sit in front of a screen all day away from, you know, society, just slaving away at a computer, right? It doesn't derive any satisfaction for me personally, right? So one of the interesting things, and we can get back to this a little bit more, is that beyond being able to, you know, make a program through interacting with a software application, that interface of interaction, you know, Shiva Neuralink implant is going to be collapsed into a voice interaction. And everything can be done with your voice, with the exception of actually, you know, viewing a chart on a screen or whatever your dashboard might look like, right? Which will be customized to and for you and readable in a simple format anyway, right? So that idea of, you know, kind of being hands-free, detached from the technology to enable you to have a better lifestyle otherwise, you know, reduce the number of working hours from 70 to 20 and spend the rest of that time with your family, or for me, like, you know, playing hockey or snowboarding. That's what I really care about. And I think generally most people, you know, especially in the United States, where like the hustle culture is so pervasive, right? Where, you know, in many ways, we're all debt slaves, right? We're trying to make it to that next paycheck, to, you know, to invest it, buy a house, like amidst inflation, amidst uncertainty, all of these things we're working up against in this effort to become more productive, right? Now that productivity that you can own, if you just educate yourself a little bit, is being made very accessible to everyone. And is this going to replace all developers overnight? Absolutely not. But people who have an understanding of just that business logic that Syed was referring to earlier, right? You'll be able to dictate to a machine, this is the desirable outcome. This is what I imagine the algorithm would look like. Can you tell me if I'm right or wrong? And then it literally goes and writes that software, and all of the interoperability components, the integrations required, the, you know, whether it's an MCP server setup or whatever happens on the back end, all of that stuff is going to be so plug and play and readily deployable that people are not going to believe how quickly they can develop applications. And we're seeing early signs of that with, you know, OpenAI wrappers and with what's going on with tools now. I think the other very important thing to discuss, and this is, you know, part of Saeed's brilliance, and that we were talking about this very topic right before we introduced ourselves to Morpheus and what we could do. We were talking about this convergence between proprietary and open source software and technology, right? Where, because of the fact that AI is going to, I mean, an order of magnitude probably doesn't justify the scale of efficiency and speed that's going to happen with software development. But because of the ability to develop software that quickly, and to be able to reverse engineer both software and AI models themselves, which DeepSeek has already proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, we know that there's ultimately going to be this convergence between proprietary AI and models to open source ones, right?
Yeah.
And because they're open source, everybody owns it, right? So you're foolish not to consider what you can make use of that for.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to note on that point, though, that although the models are almost certainly going to be open source in the end, because exactly what you said, in practical terms, DeepSeek proved without a doubt that even if they could get within 90% of what OpenAI was and open source it, in practical terms, that's enough. And in practical terms, that's enough for it to no longer be proprietary. But the agentic side of things can remain proprietary if you're using private technology, if you're leveraging decentralized
if
compute.
the inputs are unique enough to have value themselves, right? Which goes
Sure.
back to what Syed is saying, right? Like the last commodity or the last non-commodity is that unique human experience where a machine just cannot learn, right? A machine cannot learn emotion. Syed says it very funnily when he says that, there's genuine stupidity, and that's what informs kind of the human experience in many ways.
Yeah, a computer can only feign
can't
stupidity.
hallucinate. It can hallucinate, right, and make an attempted guess. But at the end of the day, it's programmed to do a certain thing based on a certain input and a knowable, repeatable output, right? And that's probably going to change over time, and it's going to be really weird when it does. But it's the premise of an LLM is not that sophisticated. The algorithm itself, the mathematics behind the algorithm, and how the input is mapped to it, and the range of the input and the data that goes into it is certainly complex, right? And that's why the development of a model and inference is so costly, and that infrastructure is costly. But the cost of those things, and I just want to give a shout out to people who were very early in noticing this. When I moved down to St. Petersburg, Florida, Kathy Wood happened to move down ARK Invest headquarters here, and they opened up an AI innovation like startup workup hub center, and she came in to present the research of the AI team from ARK Invest, and she just showed the chart of proprietary LLMs and the convergence of open source and just how quickly it's going to happen. And I was like, okay, now I get like how quickly this could happen, and we're seeing it play out in real time. But that's why Morpheus is so well positioned, right? Is because the end user is all that matters, right? You need decentralization, you need network effects, you need self-custody, and that experience of self-custody will improve over time as all the technology does, right? But what's funny about it is agentic workflows have the potential to fix a lot of the programmability and composability issues within crypto, right? Where it's like, I don't want to sit there and manage my asymmetric keys and individual wallet transactions or take 20 minutes to claim my Morpheus rewards. But those are going to take a little bit of time and some development to improve, right? But agents are a very good solution for that. So there is a beautiful marriage there.
Yeah, it fixes the UX issues of crypto completely. Which is huge because I think I mentioned this in like every episode I do right now, but crypto UX is terrible. It's a horrible experience for people who don't love it. Like if you love crypto, fine, you'll suffer through sending a test transaction on MetaMask before you do the real thing you want to do, just to make sure it ends up where you want it to end up. But in an agentic world with solid guardrails that are open source and transparent, so it's not a centralized entity determining those guardrails, it's you determining those guardrails, or at least someone you trust at the very least, like personally trust. It solves that altogether, which is so exciting. But before we wrap up,
imagine just what. Sorry, Bo. Just
no, you're good.
Now imagine the UX. It's funny, right? Imagine that UX being as simple as me just telling my agent, "Hey, I want you to go ahead and execute this because this is the output that I want."
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what's happening behind the scenes. I don't need to know any of that. The only thing that I need to know is natural language, right? Mm-hmm. I need to know English. And eventually, right, very, very soon, I don't even need to know English. I could speak in my own local language, and that agent will be able to take care of that. So when you were talking about like some upcoming use cases and things that we would do, this is all possible through what through what we're building out and what we want to build out and what we want to empower Morpheus within its network. And those are the kind of things that by staking into the SHIZA subnet that you can expect for those kinds of features and capabilities to be built out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one way that I look at it, and I think it's a good way of looking at it, is when the App Store first came out via Apple, do you remember their advertisements? There's an app for that. That was their whole thing. Like, oh, I want to do this thing. There's an app for that. Okay, this is just one app, your agent, that does all of it.
Well, now in Morpheus, it's going to be there's an agent for that.
Yeah, right. Or we refer to it as like your super agent is your personal representation on chain. And so your super agent will interact agent to agent or via the Morpheus communication protocol so that it's talking to the other agents. But it's just everything you do in data is just one It's all one song. It's all one thing. There's no need anymore to sit there and sift through 50 different apps, or in eventually even 50 different agents, because they'll find themselves for you. And Jimmy, I know you had said this before, but it's something I'm very much looking forward to. A lot of people think, as we look to the future, we're going to be in this Wally world environment where you're actually living like in the metaverse with your AR glasses on or whatever, or VR. And I'm sure there's people who will do stuff like that, but this is actually creating a world where you will be less plugged in than you need to be now, if you want to be. If you're somebody who
Exactly. The option
you can
is there,
accomplish,
which is
yes,
very
you will be able
nice.
to accomplish the same amount or more without being totally plugged in. So there's two other things I wanted to touch on before we wrap up.
Well, on
Yeah, go
on
ahead.
that point, I just want to say one thing that Jim had alluded to earlier. And this, I'm glad you brought this up, because it's very, very important, right? It's difficult for most people to see around the corner, because we don't know what's around the corner until you get to the corner, and then you get a little glimpse of it, and then you start to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with there's a lot of doom and gloom, a lot of dystopian views on what AI would do and whatnot, because again, we lack the ability to see around the corner as human beings. That's just who we are, generally speaking. But a world, so I'll add to what Jim was mentioning earlier, right? What I say is you had mentioned data is already commoditized. We're here now, today,
Yeah.
as we speak today, right? There used to be a time, I would say about 4 decades ago, right, where data was the asset, right? Where it was, if whoever had access to more data would be the one that would have the most competitive, right, advantage, right? That would have the most competitive advantage. Now once you had the internet explosion, we were bombarded with data. Now today we're drowning in data, right? So data is already commoditized. LLMs that we're talking about, right? They will be commoditized. We're starting to get there very, very rapidly. Agents that we're talking about here and are talking about these assets, right? They will absolutely get commoditized, and that's going to happen very quickly as well. So in this world where all of these things end up getting commoditized, what is the real asset, right? And what I always say about this is the real asset ends up becoming the novel human experience. And this adds to the point that you were talking about, which is by you being plugged into the metaverse, right? You're a consumer, but the value is not going to be on the consumption. The value is going to be on the input that goes into it, and that input is going to be derived from the novel human experience. And the question is, well, why can't agents, right, since they're going to be able to do all these things, why is it that they can't replicate that human experience? Because they're going to be sitting on all of this data that it's going to be learning from. Here's the reason why. The reason why is because these agents, the reason we call them artificial intelligence is because it's artificial, right? And it's easy to replicate artificial intelligence, but you know what's incredibly difficult, near impossible to replicate? Genuine stupidity. And genuine stupidity is a very, very novel human concept, right? And it's because of that genuine stupidity that actually leads to innovation. So you know what's genuine stupidity? Genuine stupidity is actually thinking, right? And it's going to sound like I'm going to contradict myself, into actually thinking that you can see around the corner, which we don't have the ability to see around the corner, right? But it's that genuine stupidity in thinking that I have the ability, I think this is what's going to happen. So because I'm thinking this is what's going to happen, let me take that risk. Let me do that. Entrepreneurs, right? It's very glamorized. It's very sexy. Everyone wants to be one, but the reality is, in order to be an entrepreneur, we're not geniuses. We're just genuinely stupid in doing the things that most smart people will refuse to do because logic dictates otherwise. Logic goes the way of AI. Stupidity goes the way of humanity, and it's that stupidity that's going to feed into building out and becoming that curating mechanism to be able to build out. And that's where this notion of the novel human experience becomes so much more valuable.
Mm-hmm. Most people call that art.
I call it stupid.
No, I love that. That's such a good explanation, and it's 100% true. I think people, just as a collective, we have so much survivor bias when we look at entrepreneurs and businesses and startups that we don't see the multiple failed attempts on the way there, and it's it's a little cliche, but it's not, because that is what makes humans what we are, right? And that's a beautiful thing. Wow, I think we should end it there. I love that. But before we do, one last time, guys, where is the best place to find you, to find SHIZA? Someone who's listening and says, hey, I'm genuinely stupid. No, I'm just kidding. But no, hey, I want to check this out. Like, what they're building sounds cool. And it really is, guys. I've tried it myself.
Yeah.
Where should they go?
So check us out on, go to our website, SHIZA.AI. As of last week, we actually, SHIZA developer is in open beta. So go ahead, sign up for it. And we haven't figured out the piece quite yet, but when I was saying that upcoming things that are going to be there, that if you are if you're a more staker and you're staking into the SHIZA subnet, you're going to get you're going to get a lot more value out of what you're going to get from SHIZA as well. And you can obviously, the best way to support us is stake to the SHIZA subnet within Morpheus. Find us on SHIZA.AI, so it's HTTPS SHIZA.AI. You can follow us on Twitter, SHIZA_AI. Same thing on LinkedIn. I don't know how many crypto folks are actually going to be on LinkedIn, but if you're genuinely stupid like me and you're on LinkedIn, follow us there as well. SHIZA.AI, and you can catch me on Twitter or Telegram at SerialTechX. SERIAL Tech TECH, and then the X.
I would say, yeah, I'm not as active on Twitter yet. Maybe one day I'll have to be. My handle is JIMLOPNYC. But yeah, Syed gave the credentials for following SHIZA abroad, especially in the Morpheus community. Please jump into the Forge. Start watching the tutorial videos that we're going to be putting forward. The community is actually helping build those out with us. So we're super excited. We'll be able to present a little bit more next week in Austin, and hopefully have more kind of, educational things along the way so that people can understand that, like you said earlier, Bo, everybody will have the potential to become their own entrepreneur and leverage these tools as if they were a developer. So excited to see that happen in reality, and what natural human stupidity could create for the benefit of everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anyone listening to this, check that out. And just as a last note, it's always my goal with Brainpower and everything that I'm working on to support as many people as I can building on top of Morpheus, but I am keenly focused on supporting builders who are also consumers of the compute side of Morpheus, because I'm really trying to create that full protocol effect of code, capital, and compute being leveraged. These guys are doing that. Check out their subnet. Check out the SHIZA developer kit, and as well as the plugins into the Morpheus Agent Forge. And yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you guys being here.
Awesome. And we're looking forward to meeting the community in Austin.
Thank you again to Syed and Jim of SHIZA for jumping on this episode of Brainpower. I hope everybody listening was able to take away some valuable pieces of information. If there's one key takeaway I'd love you to have from this, it is to check out what they're building and what these no-code tools look like within the Morpheus Agent Forge, which enable you, without being a software developer, to build your own agents, register them on the Morpheus Agent Registry, tap into Morpheus Compute through the compute router, and create this life cycle of decentralized AI that touches all the different parts of the protocol. It's awesome. I'm super excited about it as somebody who's not a software engineer myself. Even I learned how to do this and am able to interact with these tools, so I know you will be able to as well. Check out their subnet too. They are a registered builder subnet within Morpheus, so check that out, stake to them, support what they're doing. It's great for the ecosystem. As always, this is a part of the show that no one likes, but I have to do anyway. If this has been a valuable episode for you, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really does go a long way to help push the show throughout the algorithm and get a larger reach, which in turn helps the Morpheus ecosystem. With that being said, I appreciate you as always, and I will see you hopefully down in Austin, but if not, next week.
I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.
You're listening to Brainpower.